Welcome to another deep dive. Today's stack of sources is, well, it's a really comprehensive, deep-in-the-weeds collection of professional education materials.
Yeah, we're focusing purely on the assessment and evaluation of learning.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is basically to shortcut you, the listener, into understanding all the hidden science and the really rigorous mechanics behind how knowledge is actually measured, graded, and evaluated.
Which is something we all have experience with, right? I mean, we've all agonized over a test score or, a final grade at some point in our lives.
Oh, absolutely, hundreds of times.
Yeah.
But have you ever stopped to wonder how educators actually know if a test is, like, a good test? Or what mathematical biases might be secretly influencing your final grade behind the scenes?
It's wild when you start looking into the actual architecture of it all, the invisible machinery.
It really is. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even talk about how tests are built, we have to define what a grade actually is, right? We need to separate the raw numbers from the human judgment.
Exactly. Because in the professional world of education, people tend to use terms like measurement and evaluation interchangeably. But they mean very different things.
Right, so looking at our sources, they define the core terms really clearly. Measurement is just the process of quantifying data, right? Obtaining a numerical description. It just answers the question, how much?
Right, it's purely quantitative. You answered 40 out of 50 questions correctly, or, you typed 80 words per minute. That's just a measurement.
It's totally neutral.
Exactly. But evaluation is the qualitative aspect. That's when you actually examine the performance, interpret that numerical value, and make a value judgment about it.
An assessment is just the overarching process of gathering that data, while a test is the specific systematic instrument you use to measure it.
Yeah, the test is just the tool.
It makes me think of driving. Like, measurement is like reading your car's speedometer and seeing 60 miles per hour.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. It's just a cold, hard fact. But evaluation is the police officer on the side of the road deciding if that 60 miles per hour is like a safe, legal speed on the highway or a highly dangerous, reckless speed in a school zone.
Yeah, that analogy is perfect. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains why this distinction matters so much. Because knowledge is really most valuable when it's understood in context.
Right, context is everything.
I mean, a raw measurement, say a score of 75, means absolutely nothing in a vacuum. It doesn't tell you if the learning objectives were actually met until you apply that evaluation step.
Okay, so now that we know the difference between, just measuring a score and actually evaluating it, we need to understand when educators choose to deploy these tools.
Right, the timing of the assessment.
Yeah.
And what they're actually comparing your score against.
Yeah, because the sources break down 4 functional types of assessment. And the first 2 are pretty straightforward. You have placement assessment, which is just checking prerequisites before you even start.
Just making sure you're in the right room, basically.
Exactly. And then diagnostic assessment, which happens right before instruction starts to find your specific strengths and weaknesses. But then we hit the third one, which is formative assessment.
Ah, yes, formative.
And this is where I really have to push back a little, or at least ask a question, because formative assessment happens during the instruction process.
Right. While the learning is actively happening.
So isn't that just penalizing a student while they are still trying to figure things out? Like, if I'm bombing a few quizzes while I'm still learning the material, won't the teacher just write me off as a bad student before the final?
It's a super common fear, for sure, but it comes from a misunderstanding of what the tool is actually for. Formative assessment isn't really an assessment of the student, it's an assessment of the teaching.
Wait, really? It's for the teacher?
Yeah, exactly. It's assessment for learning, not of learning. The teacher uses those quizzes to monitor progress and provide immediate feedback. If everyone fails a Tuesday formative quiz, the teacher knows to adjust Wednesday's lesson.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's a diagnostic for the curriculum itself.
Exactly. The ultimate purpose of evaluation, especially formative, is to improve student learning, not just to punish mistakes. The actual grading happens at the 4th stage, which is summative assessment.
Right, summative, like the big final exam at the end of a unit.
Yeah, that's the one that certifies mastery. But even then, there's a big question about what they're comparing you against, which brings us to norm-referenced versus criterion-referenced testing.
Okay, so norm reference testing is when they compare your performance against other students, right? The normative group.
Right, it's grading on a curve. Your score depends on how everyone else did.
But criterion reference testing compares you against a fixed absolute standard or like a specific mastery level, like the big national exams in the Philippines, the NSAT and NEET, right?
Yeah, exactly. Those are perfect examples of criterion reference tests because they interpret results against a set mastery level. The finish line doesn't move just because the other runners are slow.
That makes total sense. So, okay, we know when assessments happen and what the targets are. But what do these tests actually look like in the real world? Like, how do we actually measure human intelligence?
Well, you have to match the mode of assessment to the domain of learning you're trying to measure.
Right, and the sources highlight three main learning domains. The cognitive domain, which is all about the development of ideas and thinking.
And then there's the affective domain, which is about the assimilation of values and attitudes.
And the psychomotor domain, which is physical skills, like
Right.
actually doing something. And here's where it gets really interesting, I think, when we look at the trade-offs of different test formats.
Oh, absolutely. Because the format really dictates what you can measure.
Right. So you have traditional assessment, which is your classic paper and pen multiple choice test. It's highly objective, super easy to score, but it's an indirect measure.
Yeah, it really only hits those low-level thinking skills in the cognitive domain, memorization, basic recall.
Exactly. If you want to measure psychomotor skills, you can't use a bubble sheet. You need a performance assessment, a direct measure, like a real-world task with no single correct answer.
Like building a circuit or playing an instrument. You have to actually show you can do it.
And then for the affective domain, you have portfolio assessment, which is this purposeful, longitudinal collection of student work that shows growth over time.
Portfolios are incredible for showing true growth, but they are incredibly time-consuming to grade.
Right, and they're totally subjective, unless the teacher uses a rubric, a specific scoring guide. Otherwise, it's just the teacher's personal opinion.
Which is exactly why educators still rely so heavily on traditional tests. They just don't have the resources to do performance and portfolio assessments for everyone all the time.
But that brings up a massive issue. Since we have to rely on traditional tests, how do we ensure a multiple choice test isn't just a badly designed guessing game?
Right, how do you actually build a fair test? That all comes down to two concepts, validity and reliability, the twin pillars of test construction.
Okay, let's break those down. Validity asks, does the test measure what it purports to measure?
And reliability asks, is the test consistent and stable? Like, if you take it twice, do you get roughly the same score?
And there's a crucial rule from the sources here. A valid test is always reliable, but a reliable test is not always valid.
Exactly. Think of a bathroom scale that's broken. Every time you step on it, it says you weigh 50 pounds. You step off, step on, 50 pounds. It's incredibly consistent, highly reliable.
Right, but if you actually weigh 150 pounds, it's completely invalid. It's reliably measuring the wrong thing.
Exactly. A test can consistently yield the same score, but if the vocabulary is so confusing that it's testing reading comprehension instead of math, it's invalid.
So how do test makers prevent that?
They use a TOS, a table of specifications. It's basically a blueprint that guarantees content validity by meticulously aligning the test items with the instructional objectives.
Well, that's smart. It ensures the test actually reflects what was taught in class.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about what happens after the test. Because the teachers do something called item analysis.
Yeah, they don't just hand back grades. They analyze the statistical data of every single question, and they look at two main things: the difficulty index and the discrimination index.
Right, so the difficulty index just tells you how hard the item is based on how many people got it right. But the discrimination index, this is wild. This measures if the question successfully separates the top students from the bottom students.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You want the kids who know the material to get it right and the kids who don't to get it wrong.
But the sources talk about this quirky thing called a negative discrimination index. And when I read this, my jaw dropped.
Oh, it's a test maker's worst nightmare.
Right, because it means more students from the lower performing group got the question right than the upper performing group. The question is fundamentally flawed.
It usually means the smartest students are overthinking an ambiguous question, and the struggling students are just guessing and getting lucky.
So the test is basically punishing the people who actually know the material.
Yep. And when a teacher sees that negative discrimination index, they know they have to reject or revise that item.
That's amazing. And it brings up the whole concept of distractors, the wrong options in a multiple choice question.
Right. A, B, C, and D aren't just random. Good distractors are engineered to catch specific misunderstandings.
And if nobody chooses option C, the analysis flags it as an ineffective distractor. It's completely useless. It's crazy how much invisible engineering goes into just one single test question.
It really is. But even after the test is perfectly built and scored, the teacher is left with a massive pile of raw numbers. And that's when the statistical analysis really kicks in.
Right, decoding the data. The sources go into measures of central tendency, like mean, median, and mode, and measures of variability, like range and standard deviation.
And standard deviation is key. It tells you how spread out the scores are. A small standard deviation means the scores are tightly bunched together.
Which means everyone performs somewhat similarly, but a large standard deviation means the scores are widespread. There's a huge gap in the classroom.
Exactly. And graphing those scores reveals the skewness of the test.
Which is basically the shape of the curve, right?
Yeah.
So a positively skewed distribution means most scores are low, kind of massing on the left side of the graph. That tells the teacher the test was likely way too difficult.
Right, it crushed everyone. But a negatively skewed distribution means most scores are high, clustered on the right, which means the test was relatively easy or the instruction was just incredibly effective.
Okay, so the math gives us this great objective view. But humans still have to evaluate things, especially essays or portfolios. And human bias can totally ruin the data.
Oh, rater bias is a massive problem. You have the generosity error, where the teacher rates everyone too highly, or the severity error, where they're way too harsh.
And the really sneaky one, the central tendency error. This is when the evaluator just avoids extremes and rates everyone as average out of caution.
Yeah, playing it totally safe.
So what does this all mean? If a teacher falls into the central tendency error, it's basically like a movie reviewer giving every single film 3 out of 5 stars just to play it safe. It tells you absolutely nothing about the actual quality.
Exactly. And this raises an important question, right? Statistics give us this normative curve, but if we rely too heavily on the math and the averages, we risk forgetting the individual.
Because an individual learner is inadequately characterized by a single test score.
Exactly. You can't boil a human down to just one number. The math is a tool, but it's not the whole story.
That's a huge takeaway. So to summarize for you listening, you now know that a grade isn't just a number. It's the result of complex measurement, evaluated against criterion or norms.
It's engineered for validity and reliability.
Right, and it's statistically analyzed for standard deviation and skewness. So the next time you take a test or evaluate someone at work, you can apply these scientific principles to ensure fairness and true learning.
Because that's the ultimate goal. Right,
Yeah.
fair and accurate evaluation.
Absolutely. But I want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought that builds on everything we've talked about.
Okay, lay it on me.
So we agreed that an individual learner can't be characterized by a single high-stress summative test score, right?
Right, the sources are clear on that.
Well, what happens in the near future when AI and digital learning platforms can continuously monitor our formative progress every single second of the day?
Oh, wow.
Right. Your keystrokes, your reading speed, your eye movements. Will the concept of a high-stress summative final exam completely disappear?
Because the machine already knows exactly what you know.
Exactly. Will it be replaced by an invisible, never-ending assessment of our entire lives? And is that a perfect educational utopia or a total privacy nightmare?
That is, well, that's terrifying, actually, but highly possible.
Something for you to mull over. Until next time, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.